Welcome to the Asset Reliability at Work podcast.
Endless journey of delight and profitability.
I think some people use it as a derogatory term towards accountants.
Being visible to the employees is important.
Hey, podcast listeners, welcome back to another episode on the Asset Reliability at Work podcast. Today's episode, we're going to be speaking with Tara Holwegner, who, as you know, if you've listened to previous episodes, she is also the show's co-host. But today we want to talk to her because of her specific knowledge on this subject. So first and foremost, before we go any further, Tara, welcome to your own podcast.
Hi, listeners.
So today's episode is titled Competency-Based Learning is Not an Expense, It's a Differentiator. I understand that talking about education and learning inside of a manufacturing setting or facility is not the sexiest topic, but it's an important one that I think is
I would disagree.
It's an often overlooked topic, and I think that there needs to be some more light shed on the importance of really developing your workforce, and so that's what we're here to talk about today. So really quick for our listeners, just to give you some background info on Tara before we begin the discussion. Tara is a learning subject matter expert for the Lifecycle Institute, which is the learning, leadership, and change management practice for lifecycle engineering. She designs learning and performance improvement solutions for businesses. So she's an incredibly talented person to speak on this subject of competency-based learning. Another thing I want to point out is Tara just recently got back from displaying her thought leadership capabilities at the Electric Power Conference in Chicago. So, Tara, just to quickly recap that experience and tell us how it went and what you kind of spoke to.
Right. So it kind of supports your description of the purpose of this podcast, which I was part of a panel that was discussing maintenance strategies for cost reduction. But I was talking about education and leadership. And I asked the attendees there what they thought and if they thought that I was actually in the right track. I was like, do you guys think I belong here? We're talking about strategies for cost reduction. And I said, who here thinks that using education and leadership as part of your reliability transformation, do you think that that can help you reduce your overall business costs? Is it a cost reduction strategy? And everyone in the room raised their hand. Like intrinsically, we know that education and learning and training and development are important, but it's time that we take that next step and use education and training and personnel development as a differentiator, as a strategic part of your business performance.
Tara, I'm just going to say, you're a freaking rock star. I'm just so happy that we have a co-host or a host in this show who is smart and can talk to the smart people we have on this podcast. So thank you very much for what you do. And that sounds like a great topic to speak in. And it's a great segue into kind of getting into this discussion. So, we're talking about competency-based learning, as we said in the opening. But really what I kind of want to lay out is what is competency when you talk about competency-based learning? So let's just go ahead and define that.
So competency is the intersection between knowledge, skills, and proficient execution. It means that you can execute a task or a responsibility in times when your environment has changed around you, in times of stress. A good example of high competency would be that pilot that landed his plane in the Hudson River after the birds had gotten in the engine or something. So it's when you execute your tasks to a level of high performance in times when things may change around you. Competency is defined, though. Not everyone needs to be able to deliver at that high level of proficiency to do their job effectively. So competency at a job or a skill needs to be defined per the job description and what that job or that responsibility is going to ask that individual to do. So competency is kind of a complex topic, actually, and it is a strategy that learning professionals need to decipher what level of competency does a certain job, task, or skill require, and then to be able to define what those different levels are and publish that and then train to that to enable a worker to be able to perform at the level needed.
Now, one thing I want to make clear, and I want to get your opinion on, is, when we talk about building competency for the individual, that's excellent. And that's what we should all strive to from an organizational level to want to do for the employees, because that really does help the business's bottom line. Do you agree with that?
So your people are your only asset that appreciates over time. And everybody that was in my electric power conference panel raised their hands because they do believe that developing your people is a cost reduction strategy, because proactive environments are more efficient, they're safer, they're more effective. Eventually, you're going to become a lower cost producer. You're going to have lower maintenance costs over time. The other cost, or the other, I guess, investment that you or benefit from the investment in people's competence that you reap is the ability for your people to help you solve problems that do arise, help you innovate new ways to do things, because they are so competent and so confident and so proficient in what they do that they help you and help your organization move around barriers that may arise within your production process or within a design issue of your equipment that's impeding your maintenance being effective.
So let's shift now, and I want to talk about the 70-20-10 model. We are talking about learning, and this is a well-known model within the learning profession. I do understand that, the 70-20-10 model is, for learning and development, but is also used to manage innovation within businesses. But, obviously we're talking about it for the learning and development side of things. So how does this model act as a learning strategy?
This is pretty current learning science, I guess. The 70-20-10 model has been around for a while. It's actually more reflective of how people learn and become competent. And the premise is that 70%, well, actually, let me back up. The premise is that 10% of true learning and competence comes from a formal learning experience, comes from the classroom. These are things that you have a quote-unquote teacher instructing, and students who are learning, whether that be online, whether that be in person. That's only 10% of how actually people execute on their knowledge and skills on the job. 20% happens. It's called social in the learning profession. This happens through peer learning. This is what people like to call water cooler learning. This happens when you turn to someone next to you who knows Excel better than you and ask them how to do a certain formula. Or this is what happens if you're working on a piece of equipment and you're asking, you might even be asking the operator, how does this function when you're operating it? But that's a social learning. That's 20%. It's also coaching. So that happens when you might be acting as a mentor or a coach to an apprentice, and that's social learning. And then 70% is experiential. This is the person or a person applying the concepts that they learn on the job, giving that person stretch goals so that they develop their skills, challenging them individually, forcing them to stretch the boundaries of their current knowledge, find what new knowledge, whatever that may be. Sometimes that's using the other 20 and the 10%, asking somebody or going to a class. But taking all of that and finding their own new knowledge and then using it, that's 70%.
Now, really quick, just to recap what Tara just discussed, because it was very important, is the 70-20-10 model for learning and development. 70% of your learning is experiential, so it happens through tasks, practice. 20% being social, which happens through other people, coaches. And 10% being more formal learning, which happens through training, when you're sitting down and taking a course. Moving to a different topic here. So we talked about a model that's pretty well known within the industry. Now I want to talk about something that's more LCI or Lifecycle Institute specific, and that's the 3A learning process. Now that is a trademark process developed by members of the Lifecycle Institute, one being Tara. Before we go any further, though, I want to give you a little bit of information regarding 3A learning. So this is a process that involves 3 phases for learning. The first phase is align, the second is assimilate, and the third is apply. And Tara will go into a little bit more detail after this. But 3A learning produces results through pre- and post-learning application, an approach that reflects research on how people learn. So Tara, talk to me a little bit more about the 3A learning process and kind of go through those 3 phases for us. And just, how Lifecycle Institute is using this to help manufacturing facilities develop their workforce into competency-based learners.
So Bill Wilder is the developer of 3A. I'm the co-developer, and it's based off the 70-20-10 model. The concept behind 3A is that in order to get to that 70 and above percent of somebody actually learning and then doing and then becoming competent or proficient, it has to begin with an align phase. This is where you document what skills or knowledge does the individual need to know, what behaviors are they going to execute, what results will they get when they actually perform those behaviors, and then what organization or business or department's goal is going to be achieved when that individual learns that thing and does that thing and gets results for that thing. How is it going to roll up to be a business result for the organization? A lot of times in what we actually suggest is that you start with those business goals. I mean, ISO 55000 says the same thing. It says, if you're building an asset management strategy, you start with what are your goals? What are your goals for the organization in terms of production, in terms of what needs do you have from that asset? And people are the same thing. What needs do you have from that asset, that person? And then you design what does that person need to know in order to do things that will achieve that goal. We have a tool called a learning impact map that we use to document all this. And it's a really simple table. It can be put into any kind of learning management system. It can be put on someone's office or cube or the locker. It documents how that individual's actions, once they learn how to do something new, are going to contribute to a goal. We recommend only selecting 2 or 3 at a time, something that someone can achieve within 90 days. If you don't use something within 30 days of learning it, it exits your brain, literally. It exits your short-term and your long-term memory. And so you have to relearn it again. So that's the align phase. And assimilate is the actual learning event itself. That it could be that 20 or it could be that 10. It could be something that you assign coaches and mentors to help them achieve and learn from someone else, or it can be a formal learning event. And then after the assimilation phase, the key to the assimilation phase, though, and we say is if you choose a learning event, it should have the adult learning principles. It should be aligned with the adult learning principles. We call them EARs. So that's experience, it should honor the learner's prior experience. Active, it should actively involve the learner. Self-directed, it should let the individual make choices. And so they should be choosing things and they're learning how they want to execute the practice tasks, for example. Oops, I forgot relevant. EARs. It should be relevant to the learner's job or an individual goal that they have. So in the assimilation phase, it's really important to keep those adult learning principles in mind. And finally, apply. And that's where the 70% of the 70-20-10 model comes in. This is defining during the learning event, hopefully during the assimilation phase, you define some action plan that you want to practice when you return to work. And so the apply phase is giving the individual the opportunity to practice that, giving them a way to track themselves and a mechanism to show the results that they get from applying that new learning, and then celebrating that. And that is align, assimilate, and apply.
Now that we've talked about the 70-20-10 model and went into detail about the 3A learning process from the Lifecycle Institute, I'm really curious to learn how you've applied this process with other manufacturing facilities and, kind of like a real-world scenario case. So can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So we'll talk about it from both. I work with a lot of clients where we go in to develop a custom learning and performance solution, and we'll use the learning impact map to define, okay, what are your goals? What are your business goals? And what can we teach your people? 3 learning objectives that we can teach your individuals. And what do you want them to do within 90 days to achieve this learning goal? So we'll go into our custom design with that intent. Now, from an individual perspective, let's say that you were wanting to teach a reliability engineer the Ishikawa or the fishbone problem-solving tool for root cause analysis. So that's your learning objective. You want to teach the individual how to apply the fishbone analysis to a problem. Well, what are they going to do? Within 90 days, they're going to choose a failure, and they're going to use the Ishikawa diagramming technique to find the root cause. Well, what are the results going to be from that root cause? Well, they're going to obviously reduce that failure mode from that machine, but it would be nice too if the person who's going to be executing it can put some dollars on that, or at least some reduction in downtime associated with that failure. And then how does that roll up to an organizational goal? Well, everybody wants to decrease downtime and increase uptime and reduction in failures, but ideally that would have a monetary association with it as well. For this example, I don't have any of that, but the concept is there.
Those are great examples. So what I want to ask you now to kind of wrap up this episode is about the training industry and how much it's evolved ever since basically the start of the 21st century. I read this article through Industry Week titled Closing the Manufacturing Workforce Skills Gap. This was written by Blake Moret, who's a SVP and CEO for Rockwell Automation. It was a great article that really pertains to this discussion. And so I want to quote something in there that he wrote, which was, traditional one-size-fits-all classroom instruction won't be enough, especially for younger students and employees. The most effective education will include competency-based multimedia instruction using cooperative work or learning assignments and courseware with simulations of real-life manufacturing situations. I want to get your thoughts or your response to that, and how is Lifecycle Engineering, specifically Lifecycle Institute, kind of adapting to that?
So I think that article aligns really nicely with everything we've been talking about today. Traditional one-size-fits-all classroom instruction won't be enough. It's only 10% of 70-20-10. He also talks about the need for multimedia and real-life manufacturing simulations. Today, there are so many options. There's e-learning. There are simulations that are very effective at hitting that relevancy that we talked about earlier, that adult learning need for relevancy, the self-direction. It allows the individual choice. E-learning can also have stories with decision trees, so that is another type of simulation. It's not a crane simulator, for example, where you're physically manipulating a crane, but it is a simulation to where you're having to make a decision. That's also at the application level of competency. So there are many different options out there to get to that 10%. The thing that we are trying to address in 3A learning and in 70-20-10 is have a strategy. Have a strategy that aligns your business needs to what that individual can achieve and the great things that they can do for themselves and for your organization. And then having that 10%, whether it be an e-learning solution, whether it be a classroom, whether it be a coaching scenario, have all of that aligned to allow the person to learn something new, to do something with their learning that achieves a result for them in the organization, and then celebrate what that result is. And it doesn't matter if the individual is brand new to the organization, if you're bringing in a new workforce, or if the individual is a seasoned professional. Everybody wants to develop, and everybody wants to know that their contribution is appreciated. So whether you're a seasoned professional and you decide to give back in the 20% and be a coach to someone else, whether you're the human resource professional that decides on what that 10% is and gets the maximum out of that 10% because they're focusing on adult learning strategies, or whether you're the 70, whether you're that person responsible for executing, it's all part of the partnership.
Wow, we just covered a ton of great content, and I just want to thank you so much for joining your podcast, Tara, to talk about competency-based learning and really put on display your passion and your knowledge around this subject. So thank you again for really joining the episode and going in detail as much as you did. And listeners, as we do at the end of every episode, I want to direct you back to the show notes. There's going to be 5 different links and resources for you to click on. I know that's a lot, but we did cover a lot in this episode, and I don't want to miss out on anything. So one of those links is going to be to the Learning Impact Map, so that'll give you an idea of what it is and what it looks like. The second is the Powered by RX resource portal. It's a website developed by the Lifecycle Institute where it goes into detail about the reliability excellence model, and there's 29 elements to that. And one of those elements is workforce development. So if you click on that little square with workforce development in it, you're going to find a bunch of information about the subject we just talked about today. We're going to find articles, slide share presentations, other podcasts, you name it. So there's a bunch of extra information for you. Another resource link is going to be to 3A Learning. So we talked about that, which was the trademark learning process developed by the Lifecycle Institute. and that talks about the align, assimilate, and apply. So that's an article specifically. Another resource link is to the Industry Week article I referenced earlier and I quoted from, which was Closing the Manufacturing Workforce Skills Gap. And then finally is a link just to connect with Tara on LinkedIn. So thank you so much once again, Tara, for your time in this podcast. And thank you, listeners, for being such great fans and tuning in every other week to listen to our podcast. So with that, we will see you guys in 2 more weeks on the Asset Reliability at Work podcast. Hey, listeners, one more thing before you go. If you have any feedback for the show, or you have maybe some suggestions for upcoming topics you'd love to hear about, we'd like to hear from you. So there's 2 ways to get in contact with us. The first is on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @LCE_today, so be sure to follow us. And then the other way is to email the show at podcast@lce.com. Once again, thank you for joining the show, and we look forward to more episodes on the Asset Reliability at Work podcast.